I'd had Shirelle for a couple of weeks. I liked her. She was a rotten little puppy, but puppies are lovable. And there were a couple of interesting qualities about her. One was that she had never barked. She was part husky, and sometimes huskies don't bark. So I thought that might be part of her nature. And she was pretty smart. She'd gotten house trained pretty well. But accidents happen. One day I walked in to the front room of my house, and there she was peeing under the dining room table. And I walked up to her and sternly said, "No." And so she turned around and started to bite my ankle. And I said, "No." And she started to lick up the urine. And I said, "No." And she started to bite the leg of the table. And I said, "No." And I was getting some powder and starting to clean up the stain. And she starts licking that up. "No." And so she bites my hand. "No." And she looks up at me with this fury in her eyes, staring into my face, trembling. And out of her comes this, and it was the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. I fell in love with her at that moment, picked her up, started kissing her nose and saying, I'm sorry, I know this is frustrating and all this." And for a few years, that was really all I knew about what that moment meant. But after a while, I realized it meant a ton. You see, she developed the ugliest bark I've ever known, this awful sound. And she never once hesitated to bark. She never once was concerned about the sound of it. She felt her voice was great. And I realized that this first moment was so important. And when I work with children, it's such a big deal. If you can give this, that what you did was wrong, but your truth, your voice, your anger are loved and completely acceptable. That was maybe the greatest lesson she ever gave me, but I got 100 more.